Are we a church in the lurch? Find out on this episode of Pushback.
Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pushback. I'm Dr. Jonny. It's always my privilege and pleasure every week to share my heart with you, and this is election week. If you haven't already noticed, I'm kind of a political junkie. However, the purpose of this podcast is never to tell you who to vote for. However, it's so critical that we understand the issues of our day and the time in which we live, because we were all born for such a time as this. If you're listening to my podcast and you're a human being, then you are connected to this world in the time in which we live, which means that this election for the presidency of the most powerful country in the world matters. And your vote, even though you may feel like it's insignificant or just so singular that it's not going to move the needle, your vote is critical. And it's not only critical to the outcome of the election, but it's critical for our heart stance, where we are and what we consider ourselves to be. If we truly are ambassadors of heaven, then we have a responsibility to inject ourselves into the conversation, to be voted and counted on, to matter for the social and cultural issues of our day. And so when we vote, we're actually sending a signal, I believe, to heaven. We're sending a signal to hell. We're sending a signal to the forces of this world. We're sending the signals to the principalities and the powers that we are going to stand up and be counted, that we're going to be noted and accounted for here on this earth. It's been quite the last couple of weeks when you can look some of these things up. When you talk about McDonald's and you talk about garbage, these things maybe mean something to you, and you can look up all the things that have happened. But I do want to highlight one thing that did happen a few weeks ago, which really raised my eyebrows. The candidate and our Vice President, Kamala Harris, was at a rally. And she was speaking about abortion and what she would call reproductive rights. And somebody from the crowd shouted, you could say heckled, "Jesus is Lord." And she responded to the heckler, if you want to call that, the one who interrupted her speech, by saying, "You are at the wrong rally." That, more than anything in all of my political history, 54 years of life, has been something that has been hit me in the chest. That she would have the, I guess audacity is probably the right word, but also the courage, the chutzpah to say something like that to a group of people, which I would argue a strong group of people representative in our country. She actually made a second comment that says, "Your rally is the smaller one down the street," to a roar of applause. Now, I'm not here defending interrupting somebody's speech or being a heckler, but I thought this was quite telling about the state of the church in the political sphere. This should be alarming, actually. And that's the way that I have felt. I felt anger. I felt betrayed. I felt like there was a shift that could actually be spoken and cheered in America about followers of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, this isn't new for many of you. I know you understand that the church is under a certain degree of persecution. And relative to the rest of the world, this is nothing. in the realm of persecution. And so I'm not being naive or trying to overstate things. But I just find somebody who's running for the presidency to be bold enough to say a comment like that would be something that ought to get our attention as the church. The term "in the lurch," church in the lurch. The term "in the lurch," I always think it's so interesting to go and find some of these derivations of some of these phrases. It actually comes from a French game called Lurch, Lurche. And it's a dice and board game similar to backgammon that we would play today. And if a player was left in a hopeless position, they were said to be in the lurch. Now, in the lurch is an idiom that means to be in a vulnerable or unsupported position. And I believe that's what happened at that rally, that somebody could shout Jesus is Lord and then be told that they're at the wrong rally is actually a vulnerable and unsupported position. Now, I believe as ambassadors of heaven, we are drawn to this earth for a powerful reason and purpose. And I believe that the strategy of the church is to make ourselves irreplaceable. Now, I think that's a good strategy for life. I think that's a good strategy for your job. Any places of influence that you work, you make yourself irreplaceable, indispensable. And I believe that the strategy of the church is to have such influence, have such calling, have such purpose, have such voting power, hear me in this, such voting power, that we cannot be ignored, that we cannot be told that we are at the wrong rally, that we cannot be told that ours is the smaller one down the street. That hurts when I heard that. We should have so much influence in the public square and in Washington that we can't be told that we're at the wrong rally. Now, you might be sitting here like many Americans do because we have believed and bought into, no pun intended, the garbage, the garbage that has been told to us about the separation of church and state. We've all heard it. There's a separation of church and state. You can't pray in public school because there's a separation of church and state. You can't say that in the public square because there's a separation of church and state. We've heard this so often. So my question to you, if you've bought into that or you've believed it, or the question you can ask others who wave the flag of separation of church and state, the obvious question is, where did that come from? What is the origin of that phrase? And they're going to say it's in the Constitution. And the purpose of this podcast is to push back against the notion that the separation of church and state is in the Constitution. My friends, it is not in the Constitution. Nowhere, no how is it stated there. What is the history of this phrase that has relegated the church to the smaller rally down the street and has allowed believers to relinquish their rights and free expression of their faith? Well, it's the clause in the Constitution that says there's a separation between church and state. There is no clause. It's not there. Now you may be saying, wait a minute, Dr. Jonny, what about the freedom of religion clause? It says the government cannot establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise of religion. Nothing there about the separation of church and state. If you go online and you Google it, which I did, it's interesting. It says the First Amendment's Establishment Clause prevents the government from establishing a religion. And then they say, which is a key part of the separation of church and state in the United States. That's a wrong interpretation of the First Amendment right being stated by Google. Where did they get that? Where did that come from? Well, let's be very clear historically where the phrase separation of church and state originated. It was in response to a letter written to Thomas Jefferson from the Danbury Baptists. Okay, so this is a church in the United States, and they wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson concerned that they would be restricted and they would be told what they could and could not preach. Now remember, this is a new country at this point, and they had just come out of a tyrannical reign where a king was telling people what they could and could not do. And so there was an inherent apprehension, an inherent worry in the early Church of America that once again the government would be so strong and powerful that it would be telling the churches what they could and could not say, that they would be restricting their free exercise of religion. And so Thomas Jefferson, in response to the Danbury Baptists, says, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So to be clear, this is a phrase in a letter written to a church addressing their concern about their restriction of free expression of religion. So in context, it obviously throws out all legislative truth that the separation of church and state is in the Constitution. It's not there. In fact, the concern and the reason it is number one in the constitutional doctrine, the reason it's number one is because they felt it was the most important thing, that the government would not get their hands on the free expression of church. Now, they couldn't establish a national church, but they also could not inhibit your free expression of your religious freedom. So how does praying in school inhibit the free expression of religion? Inherently, completely. It goes against what it actually says in the First Amendment and attaches something that's not even there, which is that you can't express your religion in the public square. My friends, it's not there. I want this podcast to be super clear. I want to push back against this notion that we are somehow limited in our expression of our faith out in the world, in the public sphere, that we need to be in the smaller rally down the street, only in the church building, because that's the only place that we get to talk about policy, that we get to talk about our country. No, we get to talk about it everywhere, in every circumstance. That's what the revolutionaries fought for. I say that with a smile on my face because it feels so obvious, but it's not funny. These people bled and died for our ability to actually operate freely in our religion. That means in every aspect. So when we go vote, it's a perfect expression of the fact that our vote matters as much as anyone else's, and we can actually vote based on policy. But it's much, much more than that. It means that we get to stand on the corner of the street and shout out truth about life and about our education of children, the things that matter to us, the things that are ours to carry. And inherent in that is our ability to shout, Jesus is Lord, even at a political rally, and not be told that we don't belong there. See, this was not a separation from church influence in the public square. Thomas Jefferson was reassuring the church that their free expression was alive and well, and there was no context precluding the church's involvement in government or in the public square. Nothing. Take School prayer, for example. For 180 years, it was allowed in church. And now, just recently, there's a separation of church and state. The mysterious clause in the Constitution that doesn't exist. No, see, what's shifting is power and control. That's what the political spirit. We've talked many things about that, but I'm talking about the church today, and its willingness to take a knee to the political sphere and say we don't need to enter into that realm. We should be separate. We should be careful. We should be careful because if we enter into the public square, then the public square can enter into the church. My friends, we are powerful. Greater is he than he who is in this world. We have no fear about how the world is going to indoctrinate us. We are the ones who are supposed to bring truth and relevance and influence to the world. And we can do that in every aspect. We should love and care about our country because we are actually placed in it to care and take care of it. It's an antichrist spirit that's trying to remove the influence of Jesus Christ on our world. And the church is the nest. The church is what holds it. The church is the vehicle that brings it into society. And we need to be so influential and powerful that even politicians pay attention to us because our voting block will make the difference in the election. That's just the facts, Jack. If every Christian voted along the moral compass of the Bible, it would absolutely 100%, even today, influence the election completely. But they are counting on you being relegated to the smaller rally down the street where you have no influence. They are counting on you to be so uptight and concerned about being polluted by the world that you are going to simply go inside your shell, go in the fetal position, and wait for Jesus to return. I'm telling it to you straight. We have to rise up and be accounted for in this world. We need to be so noticed, so noticeable that even the politicians can't ignore us. So that even the politicians can't tell us that we're in the wrong rally. That's what we're called to. So I can't tell you how to vote. That's not the role of this podcast. But I can tell you to rise up and be counted because that's critical to the calling that you are sent to the earth to be. And pastors, this is a great opportunity to rally the troops to be influential here on this earth. The pastor at our church has been laying it on the line that voting is an absolute responsibility of our citizenry. And I so respect him for that. What a great opportunity for him to wield influence, because that is the role that he carries as a pastor, to wield influence over his flock. So I'm going to ask you to vote for policies that you are responsible for, not personalities that you are not responsible for. You can say what you want about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, and you can talk about their personhood, but they're responsible for their own soul before the Lord, not you. I would argue, and I feel pretty confident to say that neither of them are perfect people. But what do they represent in regards to the things that we are responsible for, which is life, which is our children, which is our children's education, safety for our family. Those are the things that matter to us and that we've been handed responsibility for. So where do the candidates line up on those issues? And we vote along the lines of policy that help our family, that secure our family, that bring generational health moving forward. You'll have to decide which candidate does that. But your vote does matter. And I want to speak very specifically to the church, to church leaders, to those of us who belong to church. The freedoms that we enjoy today, we can never take for granted. If we are ever told that we don't belong or that we're the smaller rally down the street, that should bother us. because people have actually fought for us to have a voice and have a freedom of voice and a freedom of expression. It came through the soldiers that died for us. It came through Jesus, whose blood was shed for us so that we also could live a free life, a life of influence, a life of hope. These things actually matter. And the day that the church takes it for granted, and the day that the church removes itself from the public square, which, by the way, the early church, when you look at the revolutionaries and the presidencies that followed, the church was inherently influential. And the ones who ran for office were pastors and Bible scholars, because they saw the importance of biblical leadership in places of influence. And I'd also like to say that voting isn't just about winning or losing, but also the margin of victory matters. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're saying, hey, I'm not in a swing state, my vote doesn't really matter. Every vote matters because it sends a signal to the political realm, who does care about votes, by the way, and can be swayed. The margin of victory matters. And sometimes politicians receive mandates because they feel like such a majority of people support what they're thinking and doing. So every single vote matters. You matter, the church matters, and we need to be able to fight for, push back against even wrong beliefs and understanding about our very own Constitution. It's our place to be educated, knowledgeable, and influential. So with that, hopefully that motivates you and me to go and do what we're here to do, to bring life and influence on this earth. So let's go together now to set and shape the culture.